Hi, everybody. So welcome to the Rutgers Speakout for the Scholars Strike. I'm thrilled to be here with everyone, and thank you so much for coming. So my name is Donna Murch, and I'm an associate professor of history. I'm also on the executive council of the AAUP, and I'm the co-chair of the AAUP-AFT People of Color Caucus. I just wanted to start by many thank yous. First and foremost, I want to thank our organizing team, including Sherry Wolf, Kathleen Shannon, Jacob Chafin, and Sharif. Thank you so much. I'd also like to thank the leadership of the union for supporting this program and helping us put it together. And I would also love to thank my co-host and MC, Chenjerai Kumanyika, and all the speakers who have agreed to join us tonight, some from as far away as South Africa. So welcome, everyone. This event was inspired by the Scholars Strike, which, like the hashtag Black Lives Matter, started with a Twitter post. Professor Anthea Butler, a religious studies scholar at the University of Pennsylvania, tweeted, quote, "I would be down as a professor to follow the NBA strike for a few days to protest police violence in America." Butler received a deluge of responses, and so the Scholars Strike was born. The organized job actions, first by the WNBA and later the NBA, the NHL, and other sports teams, catalyzed this idea. But it is, of course, inseparable from the millions of people that have taken to the street over the past 5 months and continue to do so as we convene tonight. The depth and breadth of these protests is exponentially larger than that of the urban rebellions in the 1960s. We are in a major pivot point of our history, not unlike 1963 or 1968. 40% of counties in the United States have participated with equal levels of mobilization between cities and rural areas, according to the New York Times. We are witnessing and taking part in the largest protest movement in American history. That is, if you count it as the total numbers of people going out onto the street. One of the most inspiring elements is that for the first time in my life, I'm hearing the word structural racism and defund the police used by television announcers. This is something that I never thought that I would see. Prison abolition demands that have begun to win widespread support, and we are all reminded once again that change always comes from below through mass action, organizing, and protest. In the words of Frederick Douglass, power concedes nothing without a demand. This is a time of enormous opportunity that we must recognize, organize, and use to fight for the things that are most essential for communities of color, including safety from police and state violence, equal access to healthcare, job security, high quality public schools, and access to higher education. And this is why we are gathered here tonight, to think about how the current mobilizations translate into our everyday lives and those of our colleagues and fellow community members. While this is a time of great promise, it is also one of great peril. Since Michael Brown's murder in 2014, which inspired the Ferguson Rebellion, over 4,000 people have been killed by the police. Over a quarter of them are African American, who suffer twice the death rate of other groups. The scale and intensity of violence is increasing as the president spurs on state and private violence. Although Trump is integral to what's happening, it's important to remember that he is really just the symptom of profound inequalities, structural racism, and white revanchism of the current moment. It is also important to recognize that Trump is the symptom and reflection of much longer term structural changes, including gerrymandering, the rolling back of the Voting Rights Act, mass incarceration, violent anti-immigration policy, and the retrenchment of the welfare state. From recent events in Wisconsin and Portland and many less covered cities across the US, it is clear that there is no barrier between private white supremacist violence and that of the state. In addition to the killings, we are also witnessing the single largest attack on the Voting Rights Act in the last 50 years and the dismantling of the essential public infrastructure of our country, like the US Postal Service. In addition to the killings, this has enormous consequence not only for November's presidential election, but also for the many Black and brown people who work in these essential jobs. In the 20th century, the public sector has been the spine of Black economic security and upward mobility, and the attack on public infrastructure has enormous consequences for the lives of Black people throughout the country. Closer to home, we are facing similar problems. Barnabas and Robert Wood Johnson's defunding and attempt to privatize University Hospital in Newark, which I would stress is New Jersey's only public hospital, at the height of a global pandemic, has devastating consequences for the Black and brown populations most affected by coronavirus. Similarly, at our own university, over 1,000 workers have lost their jobs and healthcare with disproportionate effects on workers of color. We will be hearing from some of those people tonight. Sadly, there may be more layoffs to come this fall. So we have our hands full, but it's the optimism and possibility of this moment that has inspired us to create this Speak Out. We have a unique opportunity to change this country as well as the institutions and places that we call home. So before moving on, I'd like to introduce my fellow MC and co-host, Chenjerai Kumanyika. Chenjerai is an assistant professor at Rutgers Department of Journalism and Media Studies. He is the co-host and co-creator of the Peabody Award-winning podcast Uncivil, which I must say is one of my all-time favorites. And he is also on the executive committee of the 215 People's Alliance and board of directors for the Moth and Street Poets. Chenjerai.
Hey everyone, how you doing? Thank you so much, Donna, for those insights. And thank you everybody, all of our speakers and all the people watching for tuning in to this scholar strike. It's so important for us to try to show these forms of solidarity during these times. You know, it's really important for us all to stand up. So I just want to say briefly that, you know, at this kind of moment, right, of uprising, where we're seeing really unprecedented levels of uprising, right, it's a time when institutions, both institutions of police, but also within corporations and within, you know, the university, those institutions will try to define what anti-racist work means, what Black Lives Matter means, right? What real struggle for vulnerable people means. And they're going to try to define it in ways that cause institutions not to change, right? That kind of protects them and protects the powerful. So I think at this moment, right, and part of why we're coming together within this scholar strike is that we have to really do some real serious clarification right now. And that clarification is not simply the distinction between doing nothing and doing something, right? It's actually really trying to put meat on the bones and really trying to understand what is transformative, revolutionary work really all about. And so for scholars, for my colleagues, you know, both of those who are part of our union, you know, the students, all workers, you know, and everybody watching really, but I want to speak specifically to my, you know, kind of colleagues, right? A lot of times we write revolutionary things. We may be teaching in ways that we feel are revolutionary inside of the university. But I think at this time, those things are not enough. All of us are called to challenge our organizations. If the most vulnerable people out here are in the streets during the COVID crisis, if the most vulnerable people are on the front lines challenging their lives and their organizations, we too have to be on the front line challenging our own organizations whose reach is deep in our communities and who affects, you know, the world really, right? And so I think that's really important. And I just want to sort of welcome everybody into that. And yes, this means putting our jobs at line. I'm not a tenure professor. You know, I do this every time I call Rutgers out, I'm taking a risk, right? But the thing that I think we've learned and we're learning with the incredible work our union is doing here at Rutgers is that the more we work together, the more we use our collective voice and the more we center the common good, right? Not like just what means a salary increase for me or what, you know, racial justice looks like for a professor, not even just for students, but for our whole community. The stronger we use that collective power, right? Our voice is strong and we're getting real strong right now in Rutgers if you understand what's going on. So with that said, I'm really excited to welcome everybody. And I guess we're about to introduce our guests, but before that, Donna, do you want to talk about our allies at New Jersey Communities United?
Yes. So we'd like to encourage you to support our allies at New Jersey's Community United and Communications Workers of America, Local 1037, who are hosting a Speak Out tomorrow night for childcare workers. Their fight is very much like ours, Childcare workers are waging health and safety battles over reopening childcare centers during the COVID-19 pandemic. In home care, childcare providers are fighting for the resources they need to continue providing care, including demands for healthcare coverage. So the Speak Out is tomorrow, September 9th at 6:30, and we have the link, which we can share with you. So let's get started. I'd like to start by introducing our first guest, who's truly my pleasure to introduce, who has come to us all the way from South Africa, Professor Walton Johnson. Professor Johnson is one of the longest standing Black professors at Rutgers. He came to Rutgers in the 1970s and has served as the Dean of Livingston College and the Chair of Africana Studies.
Thank you very much. That's my cue, is it? I want to begin by thanking those of you who organized this wonderful event. I am going to speak on the two topics that you suggested, namely, how does my research and experience impact the events that are going on presently, and what exactly does that research and experience show as regards racial equity and justice at Rutgers? And I'm going to talk about two events which occurred during my tenure here. The lessons that I have drawn, and not all of them, but the topics that I'm going to put out to begin our conversation tonight are, number one, that protests, as inspiring as they are, excuse me, for the participants, don't actually change institutional power, and they don't necessarily upset systemic racism. The second point is that in face of change, there's huge pressure among the privileged of whatever nature to engage in what the sociologists call social cohesion, of coming together to resist the change. In the case of racism in the US, what I'm going to tell you is about Rutgers University. So the message that it's only the poor and uneducated and so on who can act in racist ways is completely negated by some of the behavior at Rutgers University. And thirdly, one of the conclusions I've come to is that the importance of what I'm calling clients, that is, people of color who are part of the system and who wittingly or unwittingly must help to sustain the system of which they are a part. The first topic is to call to everyone's attention the fact that Rutgers had a very, very progressive period in the 1970s. It was begun by a class action suit by the Women's Equity League. And this was during the time when the federal government oversaw this kind of activity. And for institutions that were not conforming with the guidelines, they risked losing their federal funding. So as a result of that, Rutgers was one of a number of universities that was required to dramatically increase its participation of students of color and of faculty of color, and of course of women. And as a result of really unique policies set in place regarding hiring and regarding admission, there were dramatic increases. Just to give you a few numbers, in 1969, it's estimated that 1% of the student body at Rutgers was African American. 10 years later, by 1979, that number was over 12%. Sadly, today it's down again around 7%.
1 minute.
But 1 minute, okay. The last thing I want to say is that in 1995, the Rutgers president made an off-the-record comment stating that African Americans didn't have the genetic hereditary background to do as well as white students on the SAT. This led to massive protests at Rutgers. The students formed the United Students Coalition. I can tell you more about that. They demanded the resignation of the president. But the main point is that both in the 1980s, after these good changes, there was a retrogression and the institutions backtracked, like the whole affirmative action thing nationally. They were the systems. I have to stop now. Finish the sentence. And again, protest wasn't enough. The system won out in both of these cases. And so I'll stop there. And I think we need to talk about that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for that insight and for your solidarity. And again, thanks to everybody who's watching and joining our Scholar Strike event in solidarity with the International Scholar Strike. We have a range of amazing scholars and organizing helping us to understand how racial oppression works and what racial justice means in our university and beyond. And so next up, we're going to hear from Nicole Fleetwood. Nicole is Professor of American Studies and Art History and the author of the newly released book, Marking Time, Art in the Age of Mass Incarceration. She also has an exhibit of the same name opening at PS1 in 10 days. And with that, we'll hear from Nicole.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the introduction. And thank you to our wonderful union and our faculty leadership. And Donna, you are so inspirational, like intellectually, politically. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm an enormous fan of like many of my colleagues at Rutgers. And I just want to say, like, you know, we have 5 minutes and it's like really provocative questions that are being asked. And I always just start, like my approach to research is just to start with my personal experience and my family. I grew up in a like post-industrial working poor community in Southwest Ohio. I ended up getting my PhD at Stanford. You know, I was an assistant professor at Rutgers. I never felt welcomed on campus. I never felt like I had a home. I felt completely like, you know, I just felt like an outsider. And after I got tenure, I just started writing about the fact that I have a lot of incarcerated relatives. And I'm someone who, I do visual culture, so I was actually going to these images of posing with my incarcerated relatives during visits. And it was also a way for me to like really like create my own presence on campus, but also to like create the community that I wanted to inhabit, which is a community that is not the boundaries that we're living through right now under these current conditions of universities. And, you know, and we have to, so what I want to say is that I think one of the most important things we have to do, the work of radical people in the university, is to rigorously interrogate the carceral footprint of the university. From campus policing to having, you know, people have to acknowledge whether they have a felony conviction. There's, you know, there's an incredible organization at Rutgers called the Mountain View Project. These are formerly incarcerated people in the state of New Jersey. They're outperforming the average Rutgers university students in terms of their GPA and stuff, but they cannot major in certain fields because they can't be licensed in certain fields. They can't be because of like felony conviction. They can't live in campus housing because of felony conviction. So there's all these ways that the universities are so involved in perpetuating carcerality. And of course, we know just in terms of investments in all kinds of punishment industries. And I always think when I go to Rutgers, which I'm not commuting right now, I live in New York, but I have this really weird, jarring experience of driving through New Brunswick. New Brunswick looks like the town I grew up in, and then going to campus. And in my 15 years at Rutgers, and Walter, it's so great to hear from you. It's like, we're living with this apartheid system. We're like totally inhabiting it. And I just have not seen, the radical work of really transforming that, the way that the campus police, the local police really regulate those boundaries, the ways that the university continues to impoverish all the residents of New Brunswick and is involved in speculative real estate and the like. And, I think part of it is really transforming who we think our audience is, who we think we're learning from, the conversations that we're having. And that's what I'm here for. I think I did that under 5 minutes.
Yes, you did. Well under. Thank you so much.
Should I say more? I just was trying to get it all in, Donna.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Nicole. We appreciate that.
Okay.
I just also wanted to remind everyone this incredible exhibit. It opens September 17th. Is that right? At PS.
It does, and there's timed entry. Like it's free. It's open to the public. You can register online. One of the things I do want to say in terms of just transforming who we're in conversation with, and I don't mean that like abstract. For me, it was like my book is based on 70 interviews with currently and formerly incarcerated people, and that's the basis of the knowledge. And the first release of the book was to prison. So I would refuse to have my book released unless there was going to be a version that was sent out for free to incarcerated people. So that was my first audience. And so I just think that we have to come up with more imaginative, like abolition is really is about creating something otherwise, and part of that is for us to really reimagine how we inhabit space with people.
Thank you so much for that, Nicole. So I just want to welcome people who may be tuning in. This is Rutgers Speakout for the Scholar Strike. And we're moving on to our next guest, Mark Hopkins. Mark was just hired by our union, yay for us, as an organizer for Rutgers AAUP-AFT. He's a graduate of Rutgers. He participated in the NJ STEP program that Nicole was talking about, and he is a former professional researcher at Rutgers. Mark?
Yeah, hello. How you? My name. Thanks for the introduction. I have a short. Oops, sorry. Thing went backwards. Yeah, I have a short introduction, and a part I want to speak on. I really want to just talk about like what this movement means right now, and what that means for the university and how we can use that as our leverage in terms of resources to actually reduce the harm inflicted on people who are affected by mass layoffs, as well as the pandemic, the crisis, etc. So to what I understand, today's mass demonstrations and the crisis that we face in terms of Black and brown bodies not being valued and actually being silenced and invalidated, as well as humiliated throughout our culture, via social media, throughout our education systems, and of course, as was mentioned before, our carceral and justice systems. Rutgers University has a big spot or place to play in the scheme of everything, because they are at the crux of a neighborhood in each neighborhood they're in, or community in each community they're in, where they contribute a lot to everyone who has a stake in living in that community. And many of these communities, all of these communities, are majority Black and brown communities, right? And so this is a time for us to really address how the distribution and the understanding of programs and social welfare can alleviate a public health crisis, and how a university, or how any institution that has a stake in our communities, in which we have a stake in that university or institution, how they can be held accountable and how they can work with us and not work against us as if it's a business and that we're competing, right? Because this idea of competition has caused the universities to run like corporations, and they don't want to share information or create mass communities that will allow them to actually move forward and be progressive as educational institutions should be in our society. Instead, they stunt our growth and cause us more frustration, and they cause us to have less opportunities in the long run, because they stifle the growth that we could have by assuming that people need to, how you say, pay for education. That's really what I want to say. But of course, it's more complex than that. And I know there's a lot of things to unpack and concerning the current mass demonstrations and what a strike on a larger level, especially from faculty members and people in the academic community, could what we can stand to gain from that. I think that the larger academic community has to bear the burden of being leaders, the way that someone else was speaking earlier, Professor Walton, and Chenjerai, sorry if I say your name wrong, but I think they were correct in saying that, you know, we need to make sure that we create the framework that's based on evidence and what has already been happening, what we have seen in the past for historical gains in this way when in concerning mass demonstrations, and how academic institutions and institutions who have stake in communities have moved forward. And I think that those of us in the academic community who spend more time in the ivory tower than in the streets and on the grass with those of our people of our community who suffer the most from crises of this nature, or mass adverse effects. I think that we should probably start to really get out there and join them, and really show our solidarity by giving them a platform to speak, share, and actually like form strategies and solutions with those community members. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark, for those really great insights. And it's just really powerful to watch your journey and your, your political education and involvement. So thank you for everything you just said. Again, to everybody watching, we're here having our Speak Out event in solidarity with the Scholar Strike. Next up, we have Leo Valdez. Leo is a third-year graduate student in the history department, and they're working on a brilliant social history of the transgender movement that puts Black and brown trans people at the center.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you for organizing this event and inviting me. The past several months have been eye-opening. The way the government and universities have responded to the economic crisis has been incredibly dispiriting. The counter-revolution to the Black Lives Matter movement and unceasing police murders have enraged me. The patriarchal violence against Black trans people has been absolutely overwhelming. I'm a student of inequality, and I am infuriated. I'd like to make 3 points based on my knowledge as a PhD student of African American and Latinx history and my experience as a trans Latinx grad student. I'd also like to propose 3 calls to action. Number 1, the white left needs to embrace Black leadership. This is the title of an article written in July by the Black leftist historian Barbara Ransby. In it, she critiques Bernie Sanders for failing to seriously adopt racial issues pertaining to African Americans during his campaign. As a 2-time Sanders supporter, I believe this was his fatal error. We cannot continue to repeat this historic cycle. White supremacy requires white consensus. It is crucial to break down that consensus in our own communities. We, white and non-Black people, cannot remain silent in our homes and vocal on the streets. This call to action is for all of us, white and non-Black people, to reflect and discuss how we are complicit in white supremacy, how white people are over-resourced, and what true racial justice could look like. My second point is about Rutgers University. Rutgers has been an incubator of Black radical thought for decades. Universities in general have played a role in nurturing movements through supporting radical undergrads since the university opened up to women and people of color in the 1970s. I bet many young people out on the streets this summer had at least one radical professor in college who transformed them. It is heartbreaking to see the university run like a corporation. In terms of my experience as a grad student, I do research as a way to prove that I am deserving of an economic livelihood. We all enact that capitalist performance in one way or another. Extending graduate contracts for fellows and TAs is one way to reimagine the role of the university as a whole. Private universities are over-resourced, and public ones like ours face more severe economic crises. However, we must remember that scarcity is a myth. It's always about distribution. This call to action is to strike and to pressure the university to support all graduate students and all workers. My third comment is about trans people. Trans people are often overlooked during discussions of race and economic inequality, but the reality is that trans people are often disproportionately represented in the working classes. Discrimination against trans people affects their economic mobility, their physical safety, and their ability to survive police encounters, especially if they are Black or brown. We must not just look at Black leadership, but Black trans, Black queer, and Black feminist leaders. This call to action is to be in solidarity with the larger project of reparations by donating to a Black trans person's PayPal or Cash App today. If you can't, then please Google Miss Major Griffin Gracie, a Black trans prison abolitionist, and learn about her work. Thank you.
Leo, thank you so much for those wonderful comments. And we're hoping that we will be having Miss Major Griffin Gracie come to our campus very soon. I'd now like to introduce our next speaker. And for those who are just tuning in, welcome to the Rutgers Speakout in support and solidarity with the Scholar Strike. Our next speaker is Tiana Youngblood. She is a Rutgers student, class of 2021, majoring in information technology and informatics. She is a current RUSA Student Affairs Chair, which is the official voice of the undergraduate student body. Thank you so much for coming tonight, Tiana.
Hello, thank you for that lovely introduction, and thank you for allowing me to have this platform to speak. When I was first asked to speak, I had a sit-down moment to just think about what this moment meant to me. And from that, I sort of wrote a piece that I think a lot of people relate to. And I thought that this would be a great opportunity to hear what it actually means to be Black in America from a Black person than just hearing it from a news or someone that doesn't understand. So here it goes. What this moment means to me. This moment means to me that I finally have the chance to speak instead of being spoken for. It means that I am seen for my excellence and achievements instead of the color of my skin. This moment shows that I'm not a statistic that shows up for 3 seconds in the news, but I am an individual with goals and dreams. For once, I don't have to worry about being judged for a stereotype I don't fit. You see, this moment is a movement to move people into seeing me for who I really am, a human being just like everybody else. This moment is the unified answer to questions like, is there really still racism and inequality in America? And do Black people really suffer from discrimination, violence, and police brutality? Which is a resounding yes. This moment inspires the older generation to keep fighting for something that we should already have, equality, and gives the younger generation hope that we could live in a country that is united instead of divided. This moment starts conversations that we need to have with one another. This moment finally gives me a seat and a plate at the dinner table. This moment is a memorial service for those who have died for being in the moment at the wrong place and time. This is a shout out to all those who are still fighting, even though they see their loved ones dying. This is for all of the times that I was the only Black kid in class. This is for all the people who didn't think I was gonna make it. This is my shout out to all the times that I felt like I had to be silent. And finally, this hashtag, this movement and this moment signifies the exact time where I felt like I finally mattered. Thank you.
Wow. Wow, that's so powerful. Just give a second to let that land. Those powerful words from Tiana Youngblood. You didn't hear me, I was on mute, so you couldn't hear my snaps, but thank you so much. That was really powerful. Thank you to everybody who's watching. You know what I'm saying? Thank you for your solidarity. Thank you to Tiana. We are now having our Speak Out, Rutgers Speak Out in solidarity with the Scholar Strike event. And next up, we're going to hear from Deandra Cameron, okay? Deandra is an immigrant, an advocate, and 2 times Educational Opportunity Fund Rutgers alumna with a master's in public health policy, you know, public health policy person, you know what I mean? Respect.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm gonna share something I wrote. It's just my thoughts and feelings towards what is going on. As an immigrant, I think I have been processing a lot. And as a 2-time Rutgers alum, I'm also getting used to America, getting used to public institutions. And so And as a public health student, these are just my thoughts and feelings. So in responding to the prompt, I think we should understand the movement as a cumulative result of centuries of oppression and unjust policies, but also as an ongoing process, and understanding that we might not see real results or a change for another 10, 20, or 30 years because of systematic racism and miseducation, and because of people in places that just aren't ready to agree that Black Lives Matter, right? So there's still a lot of unconscious bias, which means that a lot of these policies that are being implemented, we will sort of proceed in ways that are contrary to policy and procedures. What we've been seeing is a rise in allyship, but what the movement is now exposing is that the work wasn't being done. So because there were, a lot of policies, a lot of resources allocated somewhere, somehow, there was a lack of accountability. There were resources not evenly distributed, and the people in the places that are supposed to enforce these policies lacked the kind of training and guidance that they needed. So somewhere, somehow, something went wrong. So for example, in my intro, I'm an EOF student, so I'm sorry for those who don't know what the EOF program is. It is a statewide legislation that allows first-generation college students from a low-income background to receive a college education, access to college education, including support. So I'm gonna use this EOF program as an example. So in 1967, people took to the streets of Newark, right? 50 years ago. And so what we're experiencing today is that New Jersey just sworn in their first women Supreme Court justice. And so she received her education at Rutgers through the EOF program. So now we're experiencing the result of what we fought for 50 years ago, sort of this equal, not even equal because we're not equal, but there is some representation. And so I can't imagine that 50 years ago, people decided that, okay, let's do this now, and maybe in 5 decades, we'll see some results. But that is what we know to be true. And that is something that we also need to acknowledge, that this movement is an ongoing process. And because we don't necessarily understand how soon these results might be seen, that we can't give up or water down the fight. We have to keep going, because if that didn't happen 50 years ago, I don't know where I would be, or if I would even have a college education. So the point is that they did, and it still took that long. So in essence, these protests, these movements have been going on over and over again. And what we're seeing is just this cycle that we've always experienced. And the reason we always come back here is because we can't just have policy change, right? We can't just throw resources. We can't just form committees or task force. It has to be more intentional, or as we can see, an entire race will slip through the cracks. And a prime example is the coronavirus pandemic. So African Americans make up 13.4% of the population, but almost 18% of the population that reported deaths from the coronavirus are African Americans. So there's a 4% gap between the number in the population and the number that are dying from the virus, and this isn't seen in any other racial category. So Blacks are more likely to live in densely populated areas. They're further away from grocery stores and medical facilities. They live in multi-generation family homes. They're most likely to take mass transit, so they're more exposed to the virus, and they're twice as likely to not have health insurance or any of the jobs that sort of confer these benefits that offer some type of safety net for these kind of emergencies. So in fact, Blacks have been living in a continuous state of emergency, and now we see we're dying from the hands of the very systems that are set in place to protect us. So for me, racial equity issues run deeper than access. It's not enough to get people through the doors anymore. It is a living wage, it's better paying jobs, it's equal pay for equal work, it's support in these spaces. And that means offering the tools for success, making those available, speaking to the people that need those tools, because only they can really tell you what they need, right? And I think a sustainable environment also includes preparing the table while you're inviting people, because so often one of the biggest failures is putting people at the table, but the menu doesn't change at all. And to me, that's sort of pointless. So, we've gotten really good at getting the policies done on paper in these petitions and changing the wording and the narrative. But while we are not calling out these, unconscious biases, we will still have unspoken rules and low-level accountability. And the paper will say one thing, but the practice says another. And so these are just my thoughts. These are just my thoughts, and thank you so much for the opportunity to share.
Thank you so much for that, Deandra. So for those who are just tuning in, welcome to Rutgers Scholars Strike Speak Out. Our next speaker is Petal Gatson. She is a New York State Equal Opportunity Fellowship graduate herself. She has been an EOF counselor for 18 years and has worked with non-traditional students, including adults and transfer students.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Deandra did a great job of introducing our program. Yes, I am a proud alum of the SUNY system, which was a part of, and I was a part of the EOF program. To be transparent, my husband is also an alum of the New Jersey EOF program, and we both serve as educators. He serves as a principal in Jersey City, and I am in higher ed. EOF has had a very powerful impact on our life and the trajectory of our lives and the lives of our children, our next generation. And what this moment means to me is that it continues to drill in the fact that it is important that we serve as advocates and that we speak out for and we speak out with others. Because someone in the past spoke out and fought so that I can have the opportunity to go to college, get my college degree, and to be able to be in the setting of what I do and to be able to serve and help others. So EOF and the work of EOF was birthed in the civil rights movement and the riots of Newark through protest and legislative advocacy. Young students, so it was our young students in Newark who used their voices to earn access to educational opportunities. Our students serve as leaders in their communities and on campus. Our graduates remain in the state of New Jersey and are our neighbors, our business owners, our taxpayers, and of course, our Supreme Court judges. And so we are very proud of the work that we as EOF, advisors and directors, just the work that EOF has done through the last 50 years and the impact. And like Deandra said, yes, we're happy that our students were able to have access, but we do need more moving forward. Many times we state the acronym of EOF stands for an extension of family, and that family extends to the whole family. And so in that sense, I'm talking about parents, siblings, cousins. Once a student gets into the EOF program, they're quick to go back to their previous high school. They're quick to tell their siblings and their cousins and family members about the EOF program and how it's impacted their lives. And the aim of EOF is to help change the trajectory of families. But specifically, my role today is to talk about how a subset of our students have been impacted by the layoffs at the university. Since we're speaking out, I want to talk about some of the workers who were laid off during the summer, such as our dining staff workers prior to the start of the semester, who had children who were enrolled at the university or were themselves enrolled as non-traditional students, lost the benefits of having tuition remission. And so what that means is that if you had this as a benefit and you had planned out, this is what's going to help me in college and help me pay for college or give me the opportunity to go to college. And now all of a sudden, my family has to not only deal with a layoff and the loss of income and not sure if you're going to be able to return back, but also if you're deciding to continue to be in school, you have to come up with that funding and figure out how you're going to pay for that, which in turn just helps to perpetuate the fact that if they're trying to move up and get their college degree, this just helps to kind of hold them back. And for many of our students, they were told, we only have a small subset who this impacted, but it is important. They were told to connect with the Office of Financial Aid to see what possible funding they might be eligible for. But however, there was no guarantees that they would be able to get enough funding to cover all the costs, or not to mention the outside costs, such as books and the additional fees that students had to cover. This also kind of made me think when I first brought this up as a concern was the fact that our students at least have the ability to have advocates and that we can be there to help support and advocate for them. But it also made me think of the other students whose families were laid off, who maybe were not connected with our program, who was there to help advocate for them, and how has this also impacted them. So just want to bring that as a subject that I was concerned about. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you so much. And Petal, I just really appreciate you really fleshing out how those decisions really affect people in terms of, in terms of people's lives, right? People's ability to get education, but also, workers, people who are being affected. This really brings to light the fact that, budgetary documents are racial documents and moral documents. That's where racial power is crafted, in these budgets, so I really appreciate you sharing that experience, and we definitely want to make sure the Educational Opportunity Fund can keep going really strongly. To everybody watching, thank you for joining. We are in our Speak Out for the Scholar Strike, and I just want to give a reminder that we're going to have a couple more speakers talk, and then if we have a little bit of time, we are going to do a Q&A, so you can feel free to put some questions into the Q&A chat. But coming up next, we have Catherine Sacchi and hopefully her daughter, Alyssa Thompson Sacchi. Catherine is a rising junior studying sociology and aspiring to work in higher education as a counselor. And she and her daughter have directly experienced the consequences of being laid off without furlough. And her daughter, Alyssa, is a senior English major and an undergraduate teaching and research assistant in English. So let's hear from both of you in about 5 minutes, just so we can keep it moving, but can't wait to hear from you.
Hi, thank you so much for giving me this platform. First, I wanted to say, you're right about the planning. That's what workers like me, I worked in dining services, and all my coworkers always spoke about is the opportunity we had as a benefit to rather attend Rutgers or our children to attend Rutgers. So we are considered essential employees. So during COVID, when everyone was bunkered down in their homes, we were called out and told that we cannot get the benefits to stay home with our children. We need to come out and serve. And we understood that's our call to duty. So we came out, we came on the front lines, and we worked. And once everything was done in May, there was no communication. And then at the last minute, they sent a mass email with less than 30 days that you're laid off. Good luck. So that spent a lot of us scrambling, trying to figure out how we're going to afford healthcare, how we're going to afford to send our kids to school. We already took a pay cut even working at Rutgers because our job doesn't translate in amount of dollar-wise in the outside world. So all we had was the benefits as the silver lining, So with that said, I was working in dining services. I went to school for culinary arts. I drank the Kool-Aid for Rutgers. I love Rutgers, because I believed in their mantra. I believed in, we are Rutgers, we are Scarlet Knights, we fight, we stick together, and I'm so into that. I still love Rutgers. But then I found out with everything that Rutgers doesn't love me. They don't love the essential workers. They didn't show that love. They didn't reciprocate what we gave them, which was, we made it a home for everyone. When you came into our dining halls, we made sure you was okay. But I think they did not do the same for us, and I guess that's where I feel a little sad for me and my coworkers and everybody in service, because me being in culinary arts, I said to myself, I want to give back to Rutgers. How can I do this? I went to community college and did my associates within a year. I transferred in only 17 credits from culinary arts, and I did it under a year to get my associates, and I applied to Rutgers, and I got in, and I said, you know what? I want to give back to Rutgers. I want to study sociology so I can be a counselor, so I can continue giving in a different way. And then this happens, and I'm scraping pennies to figure out how am I gonna pay, how am I not gonna get stuck in creating more debt for myself, because I am a non-traditional student. So I went to college before. So now I have to get loans, and dig myself in a bigger hole just to afford, to go to school. So I guess that's what I want to say. This is how I was affected, how the rest of my co-workers were affected, and their children. There's some that decided, I don't want to take out a loan, so they decided to put a stop in their learning so they wouldn't take course in going this semester. And there's no communication on if we're going to get a job, what's going to go on. So thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for letting me speak as well. I think that my mom really touched on a lot of the financial issues that we faced. And I think that something that affected me in this, and I think that Deandra and Petal really touched on it, is that I came to the school, and a lot of people like me, you know, we figure out college on our own, and it's sort of, you know, we don't have SAT tutors and things like that in high school. So I was able to find myself in my English major, and I found that, you know, people that look like me don't really populate these studies. And I started to feel like, you know, I can do something with this, and I can speak as a, you know, a Black woman, as a woman of color, and sort of provide a new lens, because, you know, we always read the same white authors and sort of use the same white supremacist lens to analyze things. And I think that, especially in this time, that it was really an opportune for them to cut off a service that really helped me and my mom and, you know, hundreds of people like us who were going to school and getting educated. And now we also have to worry about that. So it sort of backpedals on, I guess, providing a new way to read and to think from a Black person. So now it's not just me being concerned of, am I just going to graduate because I have one semester left? It's, am I going to be, you know, $10,000 in debt because I owe the school money that I never had to think of before? That's really what I had to say about it.
Perfect timing.
I wanted to thank Catherine and Alyssa for sharing their story, and also to stress that over 1,000 workers have been laid off by Rutgers. And this is especially frustrating to us because our union proposed a work share program in May, in which we would have used the CARE Act and New Jersey benefits program to make people whole and to have everyone in our coalition of 20,000 workers. We agreed to staged furloughs in order to prevent the firing of even a single person. The Rutgers administration refused to do this. Instead, they paid the anti-union busting anti-union law firm Jackson Lewis $1.6 million since March 2018 to oppose our pay equity program. And they chose a route of large-scale layoffs in which people are losing both their health care and their tuition benefit. This has profound effects, and it didn't have to happen. So thank you, Catherine and Alyssa. So our next speaker is Carter Mathis. He is in the English department and is a specialist in African American literature and African diaspora studies. His first book, Imagine the Sound, Experimental African American Literature After Civil Rights, focuses on the relationship between sound and literary innovation during the 60s and 70s. Carter?
All right, can everyone hear me? Good. Thanks so much for inviting me, and I'm just honored to be on this panel with my distinguished colleagues and this community here. I wanted to actually touch on two main points, and one of them has just emerged in listening to many of the points that you all have shared before me. And what I keep hearing is, I think, a really important reflection, which is about experience, you know, and our experiences we have as Black and Brown people on this campus. And I think too often, whether we're students or faculty, when we are a part of the university, the assumption is that, you know, we are just part of this kind of machine, and our personal experiences and histories are kind of left at the door. And I was really struck with Nicole's points about, you know, using her research in a way to sort of address elements of her familial and personal history and how it's been impacted in certain ways. And I think that's important for us all to kind of be able to do in whatever ways we can, and to remind ourselves that, you know, we have these rich histories tied to the communities where we're living now, or where we've grown up as Black and Brown people, and that those don't need to be sort of extinguished in order for us to fit into this machine of the university. I'm kind of reminded of James Baldwin, you know, to paraphrase him, do I really want to be integrated into a burning house? No. And so this leads to my second point, which is in order to figure out ways to create more safe spaces and to kind of honor the knowledge and experiences of Black and Brown colleagues and workers, staff, students across the university, several colleagues and I have been involved in a project to pick up on the university administration's claims of wanting to speak to the concerns of Black Lives Matter and the unrest that has emerged over the summer by approaching them through a letter, the president and the chancellor of New Brunswick, asking that they acknowledge the faculty of color, Black, Indigenous faculty of color, who have been working in these areas for so long and have been largely unacknowledged. And what we've asked for is for there to be a change in accountability and a shift in how, in the university's liberal paradigm of diversity and inclusion, towards one that's more transformative and centered around anti-racism and combating systemic racism and white supremacy. We've asked that the university acknowledge, we're in the process of trying to form a coalition of Black, Brown, Indigenous faculty of color to be a voice, because although Rutgers is New Brunswick is very rich in research among Black and Brown Indigenous faculty, there's not really a centralized way for us to kind of dialogue with one another. We're spread out in various departments which largely reinforce a sort of liberal arts paradigm, when many of us are working in interdisciplinary modes that are trying to respond to race in various ways that the university does not seem very interested in. So we've asked for a reallocation of resources to help us address this imbalance, various initiatives on various levels of pedagogy and research support that would also go towards addressing those imbalances. And essentially, like I said, a basic paradigm shift in how the university is looking at these questions, from a shift from diversity and inclusion to actively combating racism through the efforts and acknowledgement of the faculty who have been doing this work. And we feel that kind of having this caucus hopefully come together and to have these this letter answered substantively by the chancellor and the president could ultimately put us in a position as faculty to then also create coalitions with staff, students, undergraduate and graduate. That's all I'll say for now, and I can pick up on that more in the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Carter. I really appreciate both of those points you made, and perhaps we can find a way to make sure that letter is circulated broadly so that people can see what the contents are, and we can put more leverage behind that. Also, thanks to everyone who's been watching and joining in our Rutgers Speak Out in solidarity with the scholar strike. We just have a few more speakers, and we're going to try to move to a Q&A, but people are putting questions in the Q&A dialogue there. Next up, I'm really excited to announce that we have Kimberly Cook Chenault, and she's an associate professor in mechanical and aerospace engineering department in the School of Engineering. Dr. Cook Chenault is also the lead for the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee for the School of Engineering.
Hi, everybody. Can everyone hear me? Yes? Can everyone hear me? Okay. Well, first, thank you so very much for including me in this discussion. I was so excited to receive the email invite, and I struggled with coming up with something written in order to address the questions that were proposed, because this was such an emotional topic for me. So what I decided to do was to just start with some statistics to give you a little bit of a picture of my academic home. So I am, as mentioned before, an associate professor in the Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering Department, which is one of the 9 or 10 departments within the School of Engineering, which is one of the largest units at Rutgers, where we have over 5,000 students and 149 tenure track faculty serve this population of students. And of these faculty, there are about 31 women. There are 5 African Americans, myself being one of them, and there are 4 Latinx faculty and 0 Native Americans. The published numbers or statistics for the other groups, namely Asian and Caucasian, are not noted in our record, but the small percentage of African American and Latinx faculty speak for themselves. So this topic is one that brings emotion because I think that we are part of a group that has been long suffering and invisible for so long that the emergence of the Black Lives movement struck not only a chord as a Black American, but also as a member of an invisible group that I also associate as a parent of a LGBTQ+ as a parent, part of this invisible culture. And so I bring up these statistics to first illustrate that, to also ask for advice and guidance from those faculty members who have more experience and expertise as I initiate our school's first diversity and inclusion and equity committee, because it is a school that is, in my opinion, in some ways in the 60s or 70s in terms of how we look at race, how we look at gender, and how we look at other underrepresented groups that need to have a voice. And my research, because one of the questions was, how does my research and my experience relate to this current movement? Over the last 10 or so years, my home research is smart materials, but I also, as a faculty member of the last 10 years, have been looking at and studying how to best educate engineering diverse communities of people, with emphasis of the intersection of women of color and engineering, and how in many ways the way in which we educate our engineers in some ways disables, disarms, disenfranchises, and excludes. And so I've made a good deal of my time trying to study this and trying to establish pedagogy that fosters a more inclusive environment for students, and looking at how I educate in my classroom to foster an environment. Lastly, am I at the 1 minute?
Not yet.
Not yet? Okay, so the other thing that I wanted to touch on was, there was a question about what's been happening in terms of how has this movement, I think, been influencing the School of Engineering. And so I'll be honest, I pulled 4 things that have happened since the Black Lives Matter. And the first thing was, in my department, since the emergence of COVID, which ironically coincided with the Black Lives Right and the murder of George Floyd, among others, we've had faculty meetings every Friday to discuss COVID transition. In that meeting, we've had one discussion about the Black Lives Matter movement, in which my chair wrote a pre-written script about the support of Black students and the support of the Black community. There has been an anti-racism lunch group that was established by a Caucasian graduate student. And in those lunch group meetings, which I was a part of. I got to meet a few other faculty, like-minded faculty that were motivated to make the Rutgers environment, and in particular the School of Engineering, one that was more cohesive for educating all and not just a select few. And what emerged out of that was the need for, in my opinion, a formal committee where I reached out to the dean, and that is how I got this role for the diversity committee. Other than that, there's been a push in the School of Engineering to have a workshop to have these discussions. But right now I come to you, as I think a lot of you have expertise, other than I'm a Black person, but in the School of Engineering, we need help. I don't know how to articulate it in such a way, but when you have statistics where I'm the only Black engineering faculty out of 150.
One more minute.
Let's let it sink in. I'll take my minute to let that sink in.
Thank you so much, Professor Cook-Chanot. And yeah, it's still sinking in. I'll add that in our 2019 contract, we won $20 million to fund tenure track jobs to increase the diversity, the hiring of women and people of color. So those funds are there. And I think this is part of this moment. We have an incredible opportunity to mobilize as the entire country and world is focused on this moment. And it's clear that in places like engineering and the sciences, this is incredibly important. So our final speaker is Professor Todd Wolfson. He's an anthropologist by training, and he is also co-founder of the Media Mobilizing Project based in Philadelphia and the co-director of the Mike Center. We, however, know him as our union president of AAUP-AFT. Todd?
Hey, everyone. I want to start by saying that the Rutgers AAUP-AFT unequivocally support the movement for Black Lives, and we stand resolutely against police brutality and white supremacy. But to say that Black Lives Matter is just a beginning of what we need to do. Not only do Black Lives Matter, coming together as a society to fight racism is essential to the future of our humanity. But before I say a bit more about the fight against racism and how it fits into our union, I want to take a minute first to thank the People of Color Committee within the union for their leadership. From the beginning, the POC committee responded to the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, calling on union leadership to respond to the national epidemic, and we have been trying to. And I want to give a quick special shout out to Delara Demir, a grad in sociology who played an important role there. I also want to thank Deepa Kumar. As immediate past president, she and David Hughes made the issue of racism and racial inequality a central part of our union's mission. She did this, as Donna just mentioned, including hiring and retention and promotion as a key part of what we fought for, as well as a pay equity process focused on race and gender. We won pay equity in our last contract, and as Donna said, 20 million in diversity hiring and retention, so the faculty of this university could reflect the beautiful multiracial student body of this university. But our fight went beyond contractual demands. We fought to support our Muslim students and colleagues who were unable to return to the US under the Muslim ban. We supported our DACA students and demanded that Rutgers become a sanctuary university, a demand we won. And I'll say more about this in a bit, but the future of the union movement, and this is clear, if we're to grow as a union movement to become the social force we once were, we must include a full-throated fight for racial justice and against white supremacy. There's no other way forward. For me, I just want to mark that it's wonderful to be in this space with all of you, and I'm truly, truly honored. And I do want to take a minute to thank Chenjerai. I'm lucky to be in a department and call him a colleague and comrade. And I also want to thank Donna for her leadership in organizing and co-chairing the People of Color Committee in the union and pressing us as a union on these issues. I was saying this to Becky Given, the VP of the union, the other day, that in many ways, Donna is the heart and soul of this union, and it's just wonderful. So I want to discuss how the fight against the long history of racism and white supremacy expresses itself here at Rutgers, and people have marked this, so I'll try to be quick. It's a familiar story. When the pandemic hit, Rutgers administrators made a cold and calculated decision to prioritize layoffs to solve the budget crisis. And as Donna marked, we offered them a different path. But we knew they were going to take this path, and we knew it because that's how history has unfolded. Whenever there's an economic crisis, people have tried to solve that crisis on the backs of the most vulnerable. Here at Rutgers, the layoffs hit low-wage workers the hardest and disproportionately hit women and people of color. And what we found most objectionable was that many of the layoff workers lost their tuition remission, as we heard from Catherine and Alyssa, and were stripped of their health care in the midst of a pandemic, as Deandra marked, when Black people are more likely to contract COVID. The layoffs at Rutgers and the mishandling of the pandemic by the previous administration is an issue of racial justice. And our fight, the fight of our local and the fight of the coalition of Rutgers unions to demand the university rescind the layoffs, is part of a vision for a university that prioritizes all members of its beloved community. Alongside the last, I also want to mark and draw your attention to Lincoln Annex Middle School in the heart of downtown Rutgers, where Rutgers, downtown New Brunswick, where Rutgers and Robert Wood Johnson conspired to tear down the school to expand the Rutgers Cancer Institute. Lincoln Annex is 3 years old. It serves 95% Latinx students, large majority economically disadvantaged. It's one of the best performing schools. The parents and students came together and said no and demanded that Lincoln Annex stay open and that Rutgers put people before profits. And I can't help thinking when I think of Lincoln Annex, what would have happened there if it was wealthy white children? Would the university and district ram this decision down the community's throats with no real deliberative process? And I think we know the answer. And one of the ways to solve and fight back, we're going to have an action that brings together the thousands of layoffs that people have marked and the fight over Lincoln Annex on September 26th. And we ask you all to come out. It'll be safe and socially distanced, but we ask you to come out and join us on Saturday, September 26th to help fight on these fronts. And I want to say this is why it's important to fight racism for unions, because racism impacts our members in various unions, our students, and the members of our community. We cannot stand together to advance a better future for us all unless we take up the problems that impact some of us. There's an old union adage, an injury to one is an injury to all, and that remains true today. But it'd be crazy not to acknowledge that the labor movement has not always been good on fighting racism. If anything, racism has been an Achilles heel of the union movement, where when workers have been divided by race, we have lost. Where we have built multiracial organizing, the story has been different historically. So today, I am inspired by the multiracial protests against structural racism and police violence that have rocked this country over the last few months. And the labor movement must learn from these protests. As we imagine a reinvigorated labor movement that can once again be a critical social force, one that can go beyond the limits of protest, to speak to Walter Johnson's earlier points, it's clear that we cannot sit out the fight for racial justice. Unions at the local and national level must center the fight for Black lives and be a positive force for real social change that addresses the long and difficult history of racism in the country and within the House of Labor. And it's important to mark, we did not call an actual scholar strike for all of us today because we didn't have the capacity as a union to do so. But that's where we need to be in a year or in 2 years if we're going to demand the kind of structural changes we need, both at this university and in this country. But most importantly and immediately, what we can do is we can call on to expel police unions from the AFL-CIO. What's become absolutely clear is that police unions play a reactionary role in supporting and condoning violence against Black people. We cannot support such unions. It also means that we can expand who we organize. Today, 65% of workers think unions are a positive force, yet less than 20% of the workers are union in this country. And unions often and traditionally have ignored low-wage workers, largely people of color. So if the union movement is going to reorganize these jobs and reorganize itself as one of the central forces of racial justice, it must take this fight on. That is the fight of our generation and one that we cannot shirk from if we're to build a truly just and equitable society. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Todd. I just wanted to make a quick comment, which is that we have some people queued up to ask questions. If you need to ask a question, then send it to Facebook or to our organizers. But I wanted to thank everyone for their incredible contributions and just for sharing with us so profoundly. So I think, should we start with our first question? Do we have Asada Davis or?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, wonderful. Hello,
So,
Asada.
hi everyone, my name is Asada and I'm a senior at Rutgers, but I'm also the daughter of 2 Black Rutgers alumni, one of whom was an EOF student, and I'm also the niece of 5 Black alumni, many of whom were the first in their family to go to college. And so I've always grown up hearing so many stories about Rutgers and like just the rich culture that Rutgers has for Black and brown people. And so that was a large reason of why I wanted to come here when I was deciding where to go to college. And so I came to Rutgers thinking of it as the HBCU of New Jersey, and just a space, remembering it as a space where so many people of different economic backgrounds and racial backgrounds could come and find a place to thrive and really find a place to seek higher education. But I've been here for 4 years now, and what I can definitely say is that the Rutgers that I know is very different than the Rutgers that my parents knew in the 90s and that my aunts and uncles knew up through the 2000s, early 2000s. And so that's been very painful for me to watch and to have these different narratives to grapple with. And so it's something that you see in every aspect of Rutgers. You see the disappearance of Black and brown people from this space that was once meant to be their space. Just a place where people could come and receive the education they wanted, and people of different backgrounds could really come to try and find a path to thrive. And it's hurtful to not see that be the case as much these days. And so my closest community at Rutgers is definitely the Honors College. And so you see this issue appearing everywhere. At the Honors College, the incoming freshman class only has 9 Black students. And so that's just something that is just so hurtful to me personally, just knowing the history of Rutgers, which has been problematic at times, but my family still has this memory of it being a good place and a good experience for them, and then seeing it not really matching up as much now. So I guess my question is, how do we best use this moment? We have so many eyes. We have a new president that's stating these priorities. We have so much energy in this moment, but how do we best use it so that the Rutgers that my family remembers does not remain a thing of the past? So, thank you.
We're going to take a cluster of questions, I think, before we have the panel respond. Do we also have Adriana?
Hello.
Hi, Adriana.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much to the speakers, and thank you to those of you that are listening at home. So my name is Adriana, and I'm a 4th-year student at the Rutgers Honors College. And I want to take this time to talk about what this moment has meant for me and how it's been addressed at the Honors College at Rutgers. So the story kind of starts with one of my friends who went to my high school with me, and she goes to the City University of New York. And what she noticed is that in this moment, her university maintained their silence. And when she was looking at her university's history and its partnership with the NYPD, she started asking a lot of questions, including why her university didn't have an Africana Studies department and why they didn't have a lot of Black educators. So my friend put all these questions together. She started an open letter and a petition demanding change from the university. And when I saw what she was doing, I thought immediately about the Honors College, which, as Asada mentioned, has had a series of issues, and that's where we both spent our first year of university. So the Honors College faces an extreme lack of diversity. But as Deandra from EOF and Professor Cook Chanot mentioned earlier, the problems of higher education run much deeper than even diversity. So within the Honors College, there's a very troubling lack of inclusivity and cultural awareness within the student body, the faculty, and even the actual structure of the curriculum. Just to give a quick example, the Honors College requires every single of its first-year students to take a very problematic mission course, which is centered on performing white saviorism in countries where students don't really have a lot of cultural knowledge. So thinking about this environment at the Honors College, I wanted to try to emulate the approach my friend had taken at the City College of New York, and I began writing an open letter. I thought back to my experiences in high school, where I took this very pivotal class called Racism, Classism, and Sexism that led me, and along with many other students at my high school, to a very, very big change of perspective about the world we live in. So with that class in mind, I centered the first draft of the letter on a race education requirement. After reaching out to involve the voices of Black students and other students of color, two of my friends from freshman year, Asada and Gabby, who will be speaking next, actually came onto the project, and we decided to start completely from scratch. Today, we have an organization called True Inclusion at the Rutgers Honors College. We conducted an inquiry into anti-Blackness at the Honors College and wrote a 50-page proposal for curriculum change. We collected Black student testimonials about experiences at the Honors College, survey data about Black students' experiences, student testimonials, and survey data about that very problematic forum course. And we've been actively working with the deans to implement our proposal. But what we're here really interested to learn from the panel is how we can extend this effort to combat anti-Blackness into the greater Rutgers University. So now I'd like to hand it over to Gabby from our team to share a little bit more about the details of this proposal and why it was so important to bring up at this moment. And hopefully after that, we hand it back to the panel. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Gabby. I just graduated and I'm doing my master's in public health here at Rutgers University. And so in our call to action, anti-Blackness in the Honors College, we proposed a 3-part cross-cultural competence curriculum, which serves to kind of dismantle the issues that we have typically seen in the Honors College. And so the first part is a cross-cultural competency freshman course, which would serve as a prerequisite to the Honors College, which Adriana stated has problematic aspects of it. And then the last part of our curriculum would be the race, inequity, and cultural engagement requirement. And so this part of the curriculum would serve as an opportunity for students to learn more about these topics within their field, or just in general if their field doesn't have something that encompasses it. And so since we have proposed our curriculum and our call to action, we have garnered the attention of the Provost's office and also President Holloway himself. And the deans of the Honors College have also been responsive to our call to action, and we are currently working together with them to create tangible change. One change that we have been able to make so far is creating curriculums to address our committees to address our curriculum proposal. And we have begun getting students that are going to be representative from different schools and also class years so that we can have a formal proposal that the Honors College can implement by the next semester or the next school year. Overall, our vision for the Honors College is to make cross-cultural competence at the heart of it, from the staff to education and to the overall culture of the institution. The details of that vision are going to change, but we know that we can achieve that goal by working with the Honors College and also working with the larger Rutgers community, because there are a lot of people that are doing similar work that I think that we can definitely work together. We believe that our vision presents a clear opportunity for the Honors College to set itself apart from other institutions and to bring value back to Rutgers and also to the greater New Brunswick community. And so the question that I kind of want to leave off with is, whether to extend the work that we've done in cultural competency at the Honors College to university change, and even to ensure that the top administrators, the deans, schools are treating the and are more fluent in cross-cultural.
All right. Thank you so much. Really appreciate all of these great questions, and we're about to open those up to the panel. I wanna add one quick question from our colleague and comrade Deepa Kumar. Deepa asks about our Freedom School, and she wants, basically wants us to speak to how we can educate our members as well as, members of our coalition, and talk more about, the history of anti-racist struggles in this country and what we can do to bring those kind of fights and the lessons from those fights into our union. So I was wondering if maybe someone like maybe Donna, you could speak briefly to the Freedom School, and then we could open up these questions to the rest of the panel.
Thank you so much, Deepa. And Deepa is, of course, our former president, who did an incredible job in so many different ways in winning a pioneering contract with race and gender provisions. And it's kind of on all of the work that she's done to build and strengthen our union and to broaden and democratize it, that all of our efforts flow from. I just want to say something quickly, which is that I, with other people in the union, am involved in organizing our Freedom School, and we will be having an event later this fall. And the idea of the Freedom School is to draw our inspiration from SNCC's Freedom School and from Highlander, and to think about the role of political education and struggle. While our universities can be profound sites of inequality, they also can be profound platforms for mobilizing. And one of the important things to remember is that when you look at the protests from the 1960s and the founding of organizations like the Black Panther Party, SNCC, and many other organizations, much of that started with political education with study groups. So our union has founded a Freedom School, and it's going to be a kind of point of union between many different kinds of struggles. So we intend to bring scholars from outside, activists, but also to have people within our 20,000 member union coalition curate their own discussions. So to talk about things in more detail, like the struggle at Lincoln Annex, to talk about the privatization and defunding of the University Hospital in Newark, which is New Jersey's only public hospital, to think about the organization that's going on among the EOF students, as well as true inclusion, and to bring these different groups of student organizing together. So I just want to do that little PR for the Freedom School, and you will be hearing more from us very soon.
All right, I just want to say, you know, I want to at least give our panel a chance to respond to the questions. And then, you know, for those, you know, we're kind of at our time that we promised. So we understand if certain people need to leave. We're going to stay on for at least maybe about 15 more minutes or so to get this to the last round of questions. I see that we have a question in the chat. Someone is asking, I think it was Gabrielle, you got cut off there toward the end. So could you come on and just very quickly restate the end of your question, and then let's open it up to the panel?
Yeah, sorry about that. My question is, how can we work, how can we extend the work that we have been doing with cross-cultural competency so that applies to the larger Rutgers community, and also how we can create a way so that deans and top administrators can be trained on cross-cultural competency so that they can deal with student issues better. I don't know if I was still,
We can hear you.
Yeah. Okay. I think most people heard most of what you said, so that's good. Thank you, Gabrielle. So to the rest of our panelists, I mean, there was a lot of questions there, and you can see some of them in the chat. And I guess, is there anything that people want to speak to based on what you heard?
Yeah, can I?
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on, thanks so much, Gabrielle and Adriana, for your points. And I mean, it's partly a question, maybe partly an observation. I'm wondering if part of what you all proposed to the leadership at the Honors College might involve eliminating standardized testing as part of the admissions. Because I think there's a larger movement now, thanks to, COVID happening and sort of forcing the university to put a pause on some standardized testing for admission to actually make that permanent. And I'm just thinking for the Honors College, it seems to me that if you can eliminate that, and then that forces the leadership, the admissions, to then pay attention perhaps to cultural competency, or, people who are sophisticated, academically rigorous, candidates who have that dimension of cultural competency, which to me is it's honorable to have that, to be like oriented towards anti-racism, and to have that kind of awareness, and those sort of being more of the criteria but I think it's fundamental on a lot of levels across the university to kind of get rid of standardized testing. I just wanted to kind of add that in. Thank you, Aldo.
If I may, could I hop in as well?
Yes.
Okay, I didn't want to cut anyone off if they wanted to speak as well.
No, thank you.
I was very excited hearing this question / hearing that there is something being done in the Honors College, and I hope it does spread. What I would say, like, little shameless plug for RUSA, definitely I would love to work on this initiative with you to sort of get it at the foot of administration and the people that it needs to go to, because I think learning more about cultural differences will actually help instead of hurt this movement that's going on, because I truly believe a lot of problems could be solved if there was just an honest, open, heart-to-heart answer and question, back and forth dialogue. What I will say is I think that what you're doing now is a great way to sort of get that word out there. Just continue to talk about it, let people listen to your ideas and maybe get feedback from it, because there is an issue, right? There is an issue that we're still at 7 to 8% of Black people on the campus as a whole. There is an issue that you don't see a lot of honors kids inside the honors school, yet time and time again you hear about excellence and achievement of Black people graduating from Rutgers, yet they didn't get that full ride. They didn't get that UF that they're supposed to. So I really think that it is a deep-rooted issue with how Rutgers accepts students in general. Not to make it too personal, but just an example, my sister graduated from high school with a near 4.5.0 GPA. She was the president of the National Honor Society for 3 years. She was in track. She was doing a lot of amazing and beautiful things, but yet when she applied to Rutgers and many other colleges, she didn't get a scholarship at all. She didn't get into the honors program. Yet when she gets here, she sees that other counterparts who have same, if not less, achievements and criterion get that same opportunity. And there are many times where you hear students get referred to Newark or Camden and get that full ride or that scholarship money that they know that we need. So instead they go to Newark, where they go to Camden, where they don't necessarily have the full length to explore and do different majors and switch out and have these schools and access and people that they could talk to. And instead going to New Brunswick, even if you're closer to New Brunswick, even if that's what you applied to and you did not apply to the other ones, that's still an option. And I personally think that that's where the issue is. It's sort of they want us here, but only a certain amount so that we could keep the ratio low, but still have that diversity and inclusion on our title. So I think that's where that issue is. It's more deeply rooted than just National Honor Society or the Honors College. I think it's a matter of, do they want us here? And if so, how do we fix that issue? Because I think that really is a problem that we need to address. So that would be my answer. Again, conversation is key in letting people know what's going on. Afterwards, I would love to get in contact with you and your group to figure out how RUSA could be a part of that / help, or at least me personally, being selfish, want to know. And that's what I would say to that.
Thank you so much, Tiana.
Can I say
Walton,
something?
did you have your hand up?
Yes, I'd like to just throw in a little comment to the question of how do we go about the change? And I have to say, let me preface this remark by saying, I actually actively research and have been researching this kind of thing in the US, in Europe, and in South Africa. And sadly, I have to say my research makes me very pessimistic. And it's not just on the race thing, but the people who find themselves structurally privileged in society find it very difficult to change. And I think it has to do with the fact that the kind of ideas and values and self-image that one needs to function successfully as a privileged person in a society are the very same ideas and values and whatnot. They're going to make you resist naturally, create a natural resistance to any change in the hierarchy. And I also wanted to, since I spend a lot of time in other countries, I notice, and I think it's important for people in the US to know this. You know, if you go to England or France or South Africa or wherever, it's understood that having an education system that serves all the children as well as possible is in the national interest. That to have a health system that serves all the people as well as possible is in the national interest. In the United States, sadly, somehow it's people, I get the feeling people think that, well, if you win, I lose. And there's no sense of collective responsibility, of collective unity. So I don't know how to solve the problem, but I think it's a very, very deep problem. The last thing that pardon?
I just want to make sure. I thank you so much, and I just want to make sure we can get some of our other speakers in.
Okay.
But one of the things I want to say that's really important is, you know, at Rutgers we have so many resources, scholars like yourself, Walton, and we want to bring you into our Freedom School so that we have space and can create the space to really do a serious investigation of what creates change and how we can build on the tremendous momentum. Because although I feel your pessimism and we should be, you know, critical and skepticism, this also is a moment of massive mobilization. This is a moment of opportunity, and we want to keep everybody's morale strong. So I appreciate it, and I want to bring you in. But I think we have from the honors from RUSA, we have Nicholas LaBelle, and so I just wanted to invite Nicholas in, maybe to say a few words quickly.
Thank you. I'll be brief. So first of all, my name is Nick LaBelle. I'm honored to be the president of the Rutgers University Student Assembly, which Chenjerai is also part of. So thank you, Chan, for coming. I actually got out of a quiz, so I had to come a bit late from class, but I'm very happy to be here. So like, you know, just in brief, we're doing a lot of things as students, as labor, as faculty, and we need to do more. We need to push, we need to build this consensus, become the Rutgers that we say we are. You know, Obama said in 2016, America converges here. And he's right. We have a lot of good things on campus. We have a lot of people, a lot of ideas, and we have some of the ugly parts of America. You know, there are parts of Rutgers that we are not addressing, that they might have, you know, different notions of what it means to be equal, but equal is not equitable, you know? So starting to learn as a school, I think we have the job as students to educate ourselves and each other, to be more honest in our dialogues with each other, with our peers, with our faculty. You know, I've been in a class, you know, with the professor that made a comment that was borderline racist, and we had to speak up. It was like, hey, like, that's not okay. That's not acceptable. Like, you know, we pulled them aside. Like, as a student, we can't tolerate that kind of language because it's our right to be here in education, like Walt's saying, you know, grow as younger people. But then on the direct point, you know, to address Adriana, Gabrielle, Sada, as students, you know, we are this massive body, 40,000 people, 40,000 students in partnership with faculty and labor, and we can do so much work, you know, and with our friends in Newark and Camden, that's 70,000 people. You know, that's bigger than most cities in the state of New Jersey. We are the state's, one of the state's largest cities in terms of folks that actually come to our Rutgers family, and how can we be a family? You know, so part of its history, we have to acknowledge the fact that Rutgers was built upon the backs of slave labor and other groups that were, you know, marginalized and built to become the school we are today. So when folks ask, what does Rutgers mean to me? It means a school that has deep contradictions and deep flaws, with the potential to do better and the promise to do better and the need to do better. And that includes layoffs and bringing those people back. That includes educating ourselves with cultural competency. And I want to point to Gabrielle's point. This is the thing we talked about in 2016. We brought to President Barchi and was not addressed. Well, times have changed. It's 2020. We have a new president, a new student body, a new year. This is the time to make it happen. You know, bring this change now, bring this action now. We have the force of history with us. The time is now, folks. The time is now for us to do these things. And on a final point, is recognizing the history of Rutgers. You know, we have names on campus that are named for people that held enslaved persons. You know, and it's a great contradiction. We have the skyrise of Stern Tooth Apartments, and across the street, you know, Hardenberg Hall, and their family owned her family. And it's a really strange thing to think about. You know, you have students living in those dorms now that have had that same struggle, thinking in that space, like, wow, I'm living here as a person of color, and I'm living in a building named after someone that owned my ancestors potentially. That kind of, that, you know, that dichotomy, that breaks. So we need to work on those points. And on the final point, you know, I think that we should talk about as a student body and a union is reparations. Just bringing that issue up to the Rutgers body, to the campus culture, you know, talking about what that entails. It's a hard talk to have, but we need to have it. So RUSA is actively working on that now. You know, John and myself, our entire body, we welcome all people to come, students, labor, faculty. We're here to work with you, work with everyone, and we want to make this year the best it can be moving forward. So thank you for your time. We are honored to be here, and we look forward to working with you this year.
Thank you so much for that, Nicholas. It was so powerful and uplifting and reminding us of possibilities and how to really capitalize on this moment, which is really one of the most profound, I think, in our history. Before I go to the final response, I think, Kimberly, I saw your hand up, so I thought it would be wonderful to end with you. Before we do that, I wanted to mention a couple of ways that you can get involved in organizing with the union. So I already talked about our Freedom School and our programming. We also have union internships to do anti-racist transformative work. So the kinds of collaborations that we saw arise organically today between RUSA and True Inclusion, and then thinking about where the EOF students fit into that as well. So that is precisely what we want to use the union for, as a place to people come and meet and figure out how to do this transformative work. So yes, if you're interested in a union internship, please get in touch with us. We will have 10 for the coming year. So please be in touch. So Professor Cook-Cheneau, would you like to finish our speak out?
Oh, just one tiny thing about the Honors College. I'm so glad to have students talk about that. I have been teaching honors classes for years, and guess how many Black students I've had in my engineering classes? Anybody want to throw up a number? Throw up some hands. I'm looking. I'm checking it out. Nope, not 3, not 2. I'm looking. I had 1 in my first, at least, you know, this year. I'm being dramatic with the pause, but the question was, well, the students posed about having some kind of training. I think that there needs to be an upper administration that is in support of these types of classes. I agree with the sentiment that people that are the benefactors of systemic racism, whether they be white or whether they be another ethnicity or nationality too, won't necessarily be in agreement. But if there are formalized rules of engagement that help to restructure this mess, then that, in my opinion, will lead to something better. I think it needs to be formal, and I think there need to be numbers attached to it. Why do there need to be numbers? Because I think it's a problem that I have my honors classes and I get my first Black student, and I've been teaching honors classes for years. I'm old. I think that's a problem. So I think we need to have some numbers. If we have a certain amount of, I've read over honors, what's that, governor school applications before. And I want to know why, if these teachers are recommending students, and I've done teacher programs for 6 and 7 years and seen honors Black students, I want to know why those teachers aren't recommending any Black students. Why? I know why, because I'm a parent. I know why. So if there are numbers attached to what our honors college should look like, because taxpayers are funding it, right? Shouldn't the numbers match what our state look like? I think they should. It starts with the top and the leadership saying that we have some formalized required training. If I have to dial into online sexual harassment training every year, and I think I need to take, everybody needs to have that, right? If I'm required to take that, why don't I have to have annual and systematic anti-racism training too? Why? Why don't I? If people don't know what to say or what not to say, then they can learn it through a systematic and formalized educational system, the same way we teach everything else. And if as a faculty member, I am judged by my scholarship and by my service and by my teaching, and all those in some way are shaped by how I interact with my culture and the people around me, and as a colleague and as a student, well, shouldn't I have to have that same kind of training? So I think that these are things that we can, whether or not, I don't care what people say when they go home. I don't care if they call me names when they get home, but when we get in the workplace, there ought to be regular and systematic rules of engagement. And I think that kind of thing can be formalized. So I agree with my colleague that says that people aren't going to be people aren't going to like it. People didn't like allowing Black people and women to vote either. But guess what? We're voting.
Yes.
Right? Why? Because it's the law.
Yes.
So let's make some systematic change. Let's change the structure.
Thank you so much for that. That is absolutely the perfect way to end. And I just want to thank everyone. I want to thank all of our speakers. I want to thank all of the commenters and the questions and all the people that have attended on Facebook as well as on the Zoom link. And I also want to thank Anthea Butler at the University of Pennsylvania for speaking up and calling for a scholar strike inspired by the WNBA and the NBA and the NHL. So let's applaud her and remember that the scholar strike is going on today and tomorrow, and there'll also be national programming through the scholar strike. And we have canceled our faculty meeting for tomorrow, so in my department. So if you feel emboldened, we have a whole other day. Thank you, everyone, and hope to see you in the Freedom School very soon.
Thanks, everybody. Stay safe. All right. Ooh, solidarity.
Good night.
Thank you, Sherry.